discovery number 2, it's us. When I was in school, I was taught that we were the product of random processes, mutations in what's called lucky biology that just happen to occur just the right ways and just the right times. You've all heard this, that we're the product of a simple form of life that became more and more complex, an accident of biology, and the thinking of us in that way leads to the same problems that thinking leads to when it comes to the cosmos. If we are in fact the product of an accident in biology, if we're the product of random mutations that just happen to occur over a long period of time, where's the specialness in that? It suggests that human life is ours to exploit, to dominate, that human life is ours to give, and that human life is ours to take away. Because there's nothing in the theory of life suggests we should think any differently. This thinking, I'm just going to give an example. It may be best exemplified by environmentalist Rachel Carson. Some of you may remember her work in the 1960s. She was one of the first environmentalists, and she published a radical book at the time. Fascinating book, changed my life, that was called Silent Spring. And in Silent Spring, she began questioning the use of pesticides, specifically DDT, because the science said this stuff is poisonous. Yet it was everywhere. I remember when we were kids growing up in the Midwest of the United States in the 1950s. Trucks would come in the summer and they would spray DDT in the gutters of the streets to keep mosquitoes from breeding, to keep the mosquito populations down. And I remember seeing kids following that truck, playing in the mist, in the steam and the smoke that was following, because no one told them not to. No one told them that DDT was harmful. And of course, all that's changed now, but here's why I'm sharing this. Rachel Carson, she summed this up beautifully. She said, we only destroy what we don't value, and we cannot value what we do not know. I'm going to invite you to think about that. We only destroy the things that we don't value. We can't value what we don't know. That's why I'm passionate about what I'm going to share with you today. I'm going to share with you a new way to think about your body, so that even if you value your body now, you can value it on a much deeper level. Because we are extraordinary beings with extraordinary potential. And man, if we ever needed to tap that potential, I can't think of a better time than right now. Because our young people are being given no reason not to value themselves. We're destroying ourselves. We're destroying our bodies through the food that we eat, the food that we manufacture, and the way that we think of our relationship to our bodies. The new story is very different. The new story about you and me when it comes to our evolution, I have to tell you that the theory of evolution is not supported by the new evidence. This is new science. It's not my theory. It's not my hypothesis. This is the new science. Let me just give you one example. We now have the ability to do something that sounded like science fiction only a few years ago. We have the ability to extract the DNA from the bone marrow of the fossilized remains of ancient forms of life that we used to believe were our ancestors. Here's the deal. When we compare the DNA from the beings that we believed we descended from to our DNA today, when we compare the genomes, what we find is there's not enough similarity in our DNA and their DNA to show that we descended from them. In some cases, we shared the earth with them, so we could not have descended from them. So we now know what we are not. We are not the product of those ancient forms of life. The DNA is also telling us something else. The DNA is telling us that the first anatomically modern humans, this is what you and I are called, AMH is the acronym, anatomically modern humans, that we appeared mysteriously on Earth about 200,000 years ago. And scientists agree with this date. There's no controversy about the date. The controversy is, how do we get here? Where do we come from? And the truth is, we really don't know the answer to that. But what the DNA is telling us is extraordinary. We appeared on Earth 200,000 years ago, and when we compare our genome today to the genome of forms of life, such as anatomically modern human, what we see is that the DNA hasn't changed. The DNA is the same today as it was then. It did not evolve slowly, gradually, over a long period of time. But there were extraordinary processes in our genome that happened suddenly, all at once. There were fusions of DNA and tweakings of genes. So the new human story is that we are the product of a mysterious genetic series of genetic mutations in biology that cannot and is not explained by evolution as we know it today. If scientists are honest, they have to say, we don't know where we came from. And I'm just going to say this, as a scientist, there's a huge difference between taking all the evidence as it's revealed and trying to force it into a pre-existing theory, like the theory of evolution. There's a huge difference between doing that taking the evidence as it is discovered and following the evidence to the new story that it tells. This is where scientists are today. They must choose. We ask science to tell us who we are. Science is beginning to tell us, and a lot of scientists don't like the answer. So we have to choose. Do we want to follow the evidence to the story that it reveals? And if we do, what is that going to tell us about ourselves? Well, that's a program unto itself. But what I want to say to you is that we are not the product of random processes, random mutations. We are not the product of lucky biology. All right, discovery number 3. Discovery number 3, we're also taught with Darwinian theories of random mutations that we humans are here as a successful species because we learned a principle that Charles Darwin himself called survival of the strongest. Now, some people say, what about survival of the fittest? That's what they've heard. His original manuscripts that I've read, he uses the language survival of the strongest that was later modified in other writings to survival of the fittest. But this is important because it gives us insight into Darwin's thinking when he was originating the theories of our origin. And he believed that nature, this is the key, that the fundamental rule of nature is based upon competition and conflict. And we are here because of violent competition. We were able to outmaneuver other species. We were stronger and used our brains. And that is through competition that we are successful. And that thinking has led us to believe just that the fundamental rule of nature is based upon conflict and competition. Once again, I remember when I was a kid, the way this came to me, not in scientific terms, but when I was a kid, I was taught, if you want to do well in life, you've got to fight for everything that you're ever going to achieve, because we live in a world of what I was told was dog eat dog. And I know some of you have heard that term before. We live in a dog eat dog world. Why don't you think about what that means to a young person when that is instilled into their psyche at an early age, that life is a competition and everyone is out to get them unless they can do better. It changes the way we think. It changes the way we solve our problems. It changes the way we approach relationships. Once we're into relationships, it changes the way that we communicate with our partners, because on a deep, deep subconscious level, we've been programmed to believe that the fundamental rule of nature is conflict and competition. So that's where we're going to go. The new science is changing all this. The new discoveries are changing all this. The new discoveries are showing us that the fundamental rule of nature is actually cooperation. Now, we all know that competition happens. We see conflict everywhere. But here's the thing. The more conflict you see, the farther we have strayed from this fundamental principle of cooperation. And that tells us if we want to get back to harmony, if we want a peaceful world, we've got a very clear blueprint in nature of how to do that. I'm just going to give you an example in case you are doubting that the fundamental rule of nature is competition, because you are living this principle right now. The average human body you'll see in a few moments, is made of about 50 trillion or so human cells. Think about this. Every one of those cells has to cooperate for you to function as a healthy, vital being. You could not be watching or listening to me right now if a deep level of cooperation was not happening within the cells and between the cells and the organs and the tissues and the glands of your body right now. So in the moments that you doubt that cooperation is the fundamental rule, you need look no further than your own body and 50 trillion reminders that you live in a world. You live in this beautiful world where the fundamental rule is cooperation, not competition.